Due to today's rapidly changing society, traditional masculinity and manhood find themselves at a crossroads. It's a paradoxical situation where, despite its enduring importance, the very essence of what it means to be a man and its traits is regularly questioned and redefined to fit these shifting times. My guest today, Ryan Michler, has dedicated the last 8 years of his life tirelessly working to preserve the timeless qualities of masculinity. On his own journey, he has also helped hundreds of thousands of men understand the importance of these qualities and, in the process, inspired them to reclaim their own sense of purpose through his podcast, Order of Man. Today, we talk about what led him to start Order of Man, the two books he has authored on the subject of masculinity, embracing masculine traits which the common narrative in society doesn't want us to exude, and the difference between being a good man and being good at being a man.
Welcome to the Stand Easy podcast, sharing the stories of the men and women of the armed forces, past and present, who have achieved greatness. Your host is Crash Stevenson.
Happy days. Ryan, thanks very much for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. I'm honored to do it.
It took us a while to get here, but we finally did it. I remember messaging you in 2019, I think it was, when I first thought about doing this podcast, and you're like, yeah, get it set up and then come and speak to me. And, well, that was 4 years ago, so thanks for sticking with it.
Hey, good. No, thank you for sticking with it. You know how many times I've told people that? It's like, you get it launched, because a lot of times people reach out and like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. I'd love you to be the first guest. And I'm honored. I'm flattered. I'm busy. Other people are busy. I'm like, you prove that you can set this thing up and do it. And if you can do that, then I'm honored to join you. I absolutely will join you. And very, very few people take me up on that. And you're one of them. So I commend you for doing it.
Oh, thanks very much. So you are former Utah National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You deployed to Iraq.
And in 2005.
And that you were out there at the same time as Jocko and Leif, is that right? You were out there during the Battle of Ramadi?
Yeah, that's right. So I left. We had a bit of a crossover. I didn't know them at the time, but we had a bit of a crossover the end of 2006. Excuse me, not the end, more of the middle. I think if I remember correctly, we left in June of 2006, and they may have got there in February, March, April, somewhere in there. So we had a couple of months of crossover. I didn't know the guys at the time, but it was really interesting when I read their book, Extreme Ownership, because everything they were talking about in the Battle of Ramadi was an area that we were actively engaged in. So I was very familiar with all of what they were talking about there.
Yeah. And so when you came back, you went into... Go on, remind me, because it's just slipped out of my head.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, financial planning. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah. Yeah, I was doing retail management before I left to Iraq, and I was in California. My ex-wife and I had just got married at the time. I think we were married for 6 months or so, and I was going to come back and do the retail management thing, but decided I didn't want to continue to do that. So I ended up taking some insurance and investment study material back to Iraq with me, and in my downtime, I would study, and I came back and took the exams and passed the exams and did that for about 9 years.
Wow. And so where did Order of Man start?
So with a financial planning practice in about 2014, I started doing a podcast for financial planning services called Wealth Anatomy. It's a podcast I started in 2014. And realized very quickly that I love the medium of podcasting, but I didn't want to continue to have that conversation. So I talked with friends and got advice and counsel, and ended up starting a podcast called Order of Man in March of 2015. And I think the first day that we released the podcast, it had more downloads that first day than any of the previous episodes, probably combined. And wow. I realized that we were on to something very, very quickly. And it's grown tremendously since then, which is a testament to the fact that the institutions in society that revolve around teaching shared principles to men have eroded, evaporated, been attacked, been undermined. And just because those institutions go away doesn't mean that men are no longer interested in that. We're very much interested in that. And this happened to be the right place at the right time. And I'm fortunate for that. And hopefully we've served the men who have listened and joined us and come to our events and all the things that they can participate in.
Yeah, I've definitely gained a lot. Like I said, I put it on my story earlier. I've been following you in the order since 2017. And
Mm.
prior to that, I was following Brett McKay.
Oh
So
yeah,
you and
yeah,
Brett have been massive, massive inputs in my life in terms of being a husband, being a father, and being a better man in general. And
yeah.
I definitely needed your median to help myself level up. And not just that, but the closed Facebook group, the questions that go on in there, and everything, all the contributions into that group. I'd say 99.9% of them are positive, and they serve the individual that asks the question. There's only the occasional dickhead here and there that claim to be alphas and all this sort of stuff, and people are so quick to jump on that and be like, nah, you're in the wrong place if you're throwing the alpha card about and all the rest of it. But did you always think that this was going to become a business? Because you, from what you've done between the podcast, between the live events, your books, and the Iron Council, you've become so successful. But was this a was this always a means to make money, or was this did this start of almost a way of chronologically recording what you're doing to become a better man? Did you? That's probably a really long-winded question.
I think I
Was
know what
this
you're
a
saying.
business idea, or was this just a way of you becoming a better man and bringing everyone along
It,
with you?
yeah, it was more the latter. The business concept wasn't a real thing for me. I took, I think it was 7 months ish before I earned my first dollar as it directly relates to Order of Man. So I really started it with the idea that I could have interviews and conversations with men like Brett McKay, who you were talking about earlier with Art of
Yeah,
Manliness, and Jocko Willink and friends and other people I've had on, as a way that I could improve myself. And these guys would come on and they'd give me free coaching, so to speak. And in exchange, I'd put our conversations on a platform and help promote them to a non-existent audience at that point.
yeah,
So it was more of a selfish pursuit in that I wanted to talk with great guys to improve myself as a father, husband, business owner, leader in my community. And so it wasn't business related. My ex-wife came to me about 6 months into it and she said, "Hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. Like, you seem excited about it. You seem hopped up on it, and it's really good. I'm excited for you, but you're taking more and more time away from your financial planning practice, and you are now putting it into Order of Man. You should probably think of a way to either scale it back so you're still doing your business, or find a way to make money." And at that point, I wasn't interested in scaling back. If anything, I was going to double down on it. So I listened to some podcasts and some different things here and there, and they had some suggestions for ways to monetize and how to create a course and this sort of thing. And that's what I did. I started a course called the Iron Council, and it was 12 guys who would go through six different points of being a man over a period of 2 weeks each. And that's what eventually became the Iron Council that is today, with over, I think, 1,100, maybe 1,200 members now. And it's been pretty incredible. We've helped tens of thousands of men over the last 8 years accomplish some of their biggest goals and objectives. Well,
that's
like you talking about
phenomenal.
with your podcast. So
Yeah. So for those who are not aware, now correct me if I'm wrong, because this is the latest info I could find just from searching through the Order Man Facebook page. You average over 1 million downloads per month on your podcast.
yeah, it's more than that. It's probably 1.5 million or so. I don't know. It's been a little while since I've looked at it. I have other people at this point, fortunately, that can look through some of that and pour over that data, which I didn't look through initially. And I don't look through now. I'm not good at that stuff. I just want to share a message. That's all I want to do. I want to learn and share. And the
That's
rest of the
awesome.
stuff, I need to have other people help me out because I'm just not good at that stuff. So I don't know the exact number, but yeah, somewhere around there.
So the other number that I did manage to find is that outside of your podcast, you reach on the different social media platforms, you reach over 1 million people per month. Now, obviously, the majority of users will be men, but I remember you said you've had women message you, and similar to what you said, your ex-wife had said, "Oh, my husband's been listening to your podcast for X amount of months now. I just say thank you for what you're doing." You must sleep so well at night knowing that you're making this phenomenal difference to this community.
I don't actually.
Really?
No, I don't. I talked about my ex-wife. I mean, that's a failure in my life, a failure with that relationship. This is a woman I planned on being with forever, and due to my own ego and my own deficiencies, managed to blow that relationship up. And which has suffered not only for her and I, but also for our children, and to
Mm.
see my kids suffer. So yeah, there's a lot that keeps me up at night. I've never once said I'm the epitome of masculinity. I've never once said I have this all figured out. I think people tend to believe that that's what I think because of the position I put myself in
Mm.
with regards to this podcast and events and things like that. So when you have a man, myself, who has been preaching this message of being a better husband, being a better father, who fails on a catastrophic level, not only is that an immense level of pressure and weight for the people I'm trying to serve, but it's also just an immense level of pressure and weight for myself personally.
Did you feel
So
that after you and your wife got divorced that some people sort of moved away because they think, well, he's saying he believes in the sanctity of marriage, yet his marriage didn't last. Was there a
yeah,
a reaction that you noticed within the community?
yeah, definitely. A lot of people thought it was hypocritical. A lot of people thought I was a charlatan, and yeah, I could definitely see that. One thing I would say to that, in defense, a little bit of that, is that just because a man doesn't follow advice doesn't mean he doesn't know which advice is accurate and true.
Right
For
on, yeah.
example, if we all followed the advice that we know about health and finances, we'd all have six-pack abs and making, over $1 million a year.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnect for men, myself included, between what we know we should be doing and what we're actually doing. And I've dubbed that the integrity gap. And my integrity gap with some aspects of my life was minimal, if not non-existent.
Mm.
And in other aspects of my life, it was this huge chasm that I failed to bridge.
But the
Which,
one of the things I really like that you put it as a post on Instagram. I think it was actually the day you said that you and your wife, you and your wife were now divorced. At the very bottom, you said, "I still believe in the sanctity of marriage." So this clearly hasn't completely turned your opinion around. That belief is still very much there.
yeah, I mean, look, I hear from men every single day who have horrible relationships, worse than I had with my ex-wife, and these are guys who are hurt. They're hurting, they're struggling, they're suffering. I know firsthand what that's like. I know a lot about what these guys are going through. And instead of blaming themselves, or at least taking responsibility for what they can, they say that, women are bitches, and, women are horrible, and a man should never get married. And look, if it were up to me at this point, I would still be in my marriage. I would still be in that position. I would still be working on improving myself and becoming a better head of my household. And just because of an isolated experience doesn't mean that all of marriage is bad. It doesn't mean that all women are horrible. It doesn't mean that a man should never get married. It doesn't mean that a man shouldn't strive to be a good leader of his home and his family. That stuff's all true.
Yeah.
I just failed to implement what needed to be done, even though I was intimately familiar with it through my own work and the messages of other people that I've had conversations with. I just failed to implement it in my own personal life, which is a huge failure on my part, but a huge learning opportunity and lesson for me as well.
Yeah. So we could sit and talk about wives and ex-wives all night, but if we can talk about your first book to begin with, absolutely phenomenal book. I read it at least once a year. For those of
Awesome.
you who haven't read it, it's called Sovereignty, The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men. I received it as a gift for Christmas in 2018.
Oh, is
My
that right?
best mate bought it for me, and he bought a copy for himself as well. And I think it was some of the last few that were on Amazon UK. So we were very lucky to get it. I actually, I don't know if you can see that, but I
That's awesome. You got it all
highlight
highlighted.
um, certain parts all the way through it. I just think it's absolutely phenomenal. And it was, people that know me know I don't blow smoke up people's arses, but it was genuinely one of the most powerful and important books I've ever read in my life. Hence why I read it at least once a year. I think it's good to
Wow.
come back to
Thank
these
you.
things. What led you to start writing a book?
So I'll answer that in a minute. Let me say one other thing about the book if I can. So right now, like I don't enjoy talking about my failures, but it's it's really important that I do
Okay.
because we all fail. And sometimes I think people look at others and they believe that they have it all figured out and that they have that Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to gold. And it's just not true. You know, you could look at my life and you could see some elements of success and think I have everything figured out. I had a big failure in that book. About a year and a half ago, my publisher came to me and said, "Hey, we're bankrupt."
Yeah.
And yeah, and ended up not being able to pay my royalties for a period of time that I was owed, you know, from book sales.
So where does that put you then? In a
So
position of you're expecting royalties to come in and then all of a sudden nothing.
I mean, financially, I'm okay because I have enough revenue coming from other sources. But
Mm.
to say that I wasn't frustrated with the amount of revenue I lost would would not be
Yeah.
accurate. I was very upset and frustrated with that. But you know, look, bad things happen, things outside of your control, and that's a little bit about what happened in this situation. And what ended up happening is that when all was said and done, I actually ended up reacquiring the licensing rights to my book, where I didn't have those before because I had already signed a contract with this company who had gone out of business. So, yeah, I may have lost money, but there was some opportunities that came available. And what's really cool about that now is that I've hired a new publisher, new distribution, and so now I have 100% rights to the distribution and sale of my book. I only bring that up because I want people to know that even though what you see in your hand or in front of you or on Instagram looks great, there's a lot of bullshit that's going on behind the scenes
Mm.
that people just really don't disclose a whole lot. So that book is actually going to be re-released in about, I think it's about 4 weeks, based on a message I got from the distributor just a couple of days ago. So
See, this makes
you
sense then because I was on Amazon today
you can't find it.
looking for the links. It's there.
It's there, but you
Paperback
can't
isn't
buy it.
there. Hardback, it's like £57, so about $65. And I was like,
Yeah,
people are going to
yeah,
think I'm fucking nuts if I give them a link to a book that's $65. But yeah, good to know it's coming out 4 or 5 weeks
yeah,
from now. And when it is, ping me a message and I'll update the descriptions and all that sort of stuff and get links to it as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I'll let you know. But back to your question about writing a book. Yeah, I had a message I wanted to share, and I thought it would be a great way to get a message out to an audience that I hadn't through the podcast or through other means. I don't particularly enjoy the writing process. I've written 2 books now. I actually hated and despised both, both processes of it, and it just wasn't fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not something I like to do, but I do it,
Mm.
and I do it because there's a message that needs to be shared, and there's a message that people need to hear that they wouldn't get in any other context. And it was good because guys like you and other people have been introduced to our work, but it was also very cathartic for me in that I had to crystallize a lot of my currently held beliefs and processes, which caused me to reflect and solidify my belief in certain aspects and caused me to question whether or not what I was saying was relevant or true,
Mm.
because I had to actually put this out in the world. It's easy to yap and open your mouth and flap your gums and tell everybody the things that you think they ought to hear. But when you put it on paper, like you really have to back that up.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I had to do research for the book, and I had to verify my beliefs, and I had to look for actual evidence, not just personal anecdotes that would support what my position was. And it helped me really solidify the message and the importance of the work that we're doing with Order of Man.
Mm. One of the things I really like about it is when I'm reading it. So if anyone who reads it who's not heard you speak or has not heard a podcast, they'll just read it in their own internal monologue. But because I've heard you speak, I've heard the podcast. When I'm reading it, I can hear your voice, and
Yeah.
it absolutely blows my mind. It's absolutely phenomenal. Your second book, Masculinity Manifesto, another gift that I got actually. That was pre-ordered for it coming out. I think it came out in the UK in November. And I think my wife pre-ordered it for me for my birthday in November. And I got it when it came to UK in December. Another great book. Why was there a need for a second book? Did you not cover everything you wanted to in the first book? Did you have second, third, fourth messages to share? What was the message behind the second book?
Yeah, I mean, the first book was a lot about planning and strategy and how you can improve your life and casting vision and working tactics and that sort of thing. So that was more of the what we need to do in order to achieve our objectives. I think Masculinity Manifesto, if I had to surmise what it meant, why I wrote it and what it meant to me, is that it teaches the how we go about doing things. You know, I often talk with my kids. If they say something, they'll say something and I'll say, hey, that's not appropriate. That the way that you said that is rude. We shouldn't be talking to each other like that. And they're like, what? I just said X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, it's not what you said. It's how you said it.
Mm.
Right? As a parent, you've all said that. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I also talk to my kids about the way that we do things. The way we do things matters. So, for example, if we were going to go do some charitable services, let's say we're going to go mow some neighbors' lawns in the community. If we bitched and we moaned and we griped and we complained and we threw little temper tantrums the entire time, is that as relevant as going and trying to have a heart of gratitude, a heart of service, a heart of being helpful, being good members of the community, and being excited about the health that we have that other people don't enjoy? Same thing. You know, we're still getting the work done, but the way that we do it matters. And I saw a real struggle for myself and other men in that this common narrative in society is that you can't be aggressive, you can't be dominant, you can't be violent, you can't be stoic, you can't be, I go through 8 different virtues in the book itself that society would say, oh, we don't want you to be those things. And my belief is no, we actually want to be those things in controlled environments, in tempered ways, but we ought to be able to embrace competitiveness. We ought to be able to embrace violence in the right situations. Let me give you an example. If I'm walking down the road with my girlfriend and somebody, violently attacks her, like, I think we could all agree that that would be an improper use of masculinity.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's more often than not, anybody that would attack a woman, whether she's with a man or not, anybody who would attack a woman, more often than not, statistically, it's going to be a man, because we are more violent. We are more territorial. We are more aggressive. We are more competitiveness. We are more dominant. We are more sexual in our drives. Like, of course, that's just masculinity. So that's an improper use of violence. Now, if on the other hand, I see that taking place and I decide to intervene and I exact violence on that individual in order to protect this woman, I think all of us would agree that that is a proper application of violence.
Yeah.
So it's not violence that's wrong. It's how we use it. Are we using it for the betterment of others, or are we using it to take advantage of others? And that's just one small example of why we can use these virtues that are traditionally, or at least currently, believed to be toxic, and instead frame them that as a positive, as a net gain for society.
It was one of the things that you mentioned in sovereignty, and I think it's the chapter on strength. And I forget exactly what it is, so I'm paraphrasing, but there's a part in there where you say that some society wants men just to be free when the shit hits the fan.
Right.
And it's almost like putting men behind that glass that says, in case of emergency, break glass. And that to me spoke on another level, because you see that. You see, especially with, I'm not going to get into a massive debate about feminism and all the rest of it, but let's just say that there are some pretty fucking extreme feminists out there who would just have masculinity and masculine and men taken off the planet altogether. But what happens when men are needed. You know, there's so many
Yeah,
scenarios where you will need a man. You know,
I agree. I mean, we're preaching to the choir, I think, a little bit here, but you're absolutely right. Any person, and I've seen men do this too. I don't know if it's white knighting or they're trying to get laid or what, but any person who undermines and attempts to erode or tell us that masculinity is irrelevant sure doesn't complain when the toilet in the bathroom needs to be fixed. That's on a micro level.
mm.
Sure doesn't complain. You know, we saw these fires in I don't know if
In
you're familiar with
Maui.
this being in Maui.
Mm.
You know what? Like, I don't know. I'll go ahead and take a look. But if I had to assume, I'd be willing to bet that the majority of first responders, emergency guys, now rescue people, I'd be willing to bet 90+% of them are men.
Yeah.
No, nobody's complaining about masculinity now as guys are uh, staying up, as they're risking their own lives, as they're risking their own livelihood because they're taking a break from work to go volunteer to help, to find people, to serve their brothers and sisters. Nobody's complaining about masculinity now. You know, the only time people complain about masculinity is when things are good, when they're the beneficiary of the very thing that they're complaining about.
Mm.
The times you don't hear people complaining about masculinity is when there's emergencies, violent encounters, shooting incidents, natural disasters, when there's some insurmountable task that needs to be accomplished, some challenge that needs to be faced. Nobody complains about the same characteristic: dominance, aggression, stoicism,
Yeah.
discipline.
Yeah.
It's only when things are good do we have the luxury of complaining about the way that we get to experience the goodness that we do. And we
Yeah.
do. You know, how many people died in order to build some of these incredible. I was in Scotland several weeks ago. We talked a little bit about that, and
Mm.
I went and saw cathedrals and monuments and castles. Like, how many men died in order to create some of the most amazing architecture, in order to create some of the most freest nations on the planet. You know, you think about, even I'm infatuated with the idea of, you know, William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, and that the whole story of that, you know. And it's not what we see in Hollywood, it's different, right?
No.
And I've actually had Randall Wallace, who created and wrote the story for Braveheart, on the podcast,
Mm.
and it's a romanticized version of what actually happened. But those were men
Mm.
who risked their lives in order to free people. That's men doing that.
Where do you see society going?
Well, we're only going one of two ways. It's going to get worse if we can't recognize and acknowledge that men play an integral part of a healthy and thriving society. If we continue to villainize men, if we continue to ostracize men, if we continue to feminize men, it's going to get worse. You know, you have these women who are like, oh, you know, men ought to act more like women, and we ought to talk about all of our problems, and we ought to be in touch with our emotional side. And then these same women, in the same breath, will say, where have all the real men gone?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a couple of things like that on social media when, you know, they're like, oh, well, men should be more in touch with their feelings. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, they'll put a post up that's like, oh, yeah, he was crying into my arm and he was telling me about, you know, whatever scenario it was. Okay, now granted, there's a time and a place, but you'd like to think that if this is somebody that you love and you can see yourself spend the rest of your life with, you can open up to them and they won't make fun of you, or they won't, you know, completely fob you off and end the relationship because you showed that little bit of openness. You know, I think the standards of which men have to adhere to in so many different scenarios throughout society now is causing some major dramas. You know, so they have to wear all these different hats, but underneath those hats, they have to have 14 different personalities for each hat to be able to fit into society now. And as you said, it's going to go one of two ways. And I'm not optimistic, if I'm honest.
Well, and it's okay that we wear a bunch of different hats. Like, it's okay that we shoulder this responsibility. And I don't, just because we do, you're not going to hear me complain about it. Like, I don't advocate for how hard it is to be a man. Like, I advocate for making ourselves more capable of dealing with the hardship of being men. But I'm not going to play the victim card like many people would have me play. Like, we're not victims. You know, as much as we've done throughout history to achieve what we have, like, we're not victims, we're victors. We have the opportunity to create something amazing. And so instead of complaining and crying about why society doesn't like us, let's instead figure out ways to be more capable so that when shit does hit the fan or people do need us, we're capable of dealing with whatever life may have to throw at us or the people that we care about. And that's what I'm trying to champion.
Yeah, absolutely. If we go to the, not the micro level, but sort of the, say, macro level, and one of the things that I took away and have almost memorized since you've said it is that you believe that if there was more open, present, and engaged fathers in the household, a lot of society's problems would be solved. I know that you grew up without a prominent father figure, although you had a stepfather at one point. I grew up with a father in the household, but he was far from engaged. I think when I was 8 or 9, he left my mother and I for someone else. I didn't find out until about 20 years later that he used to beat my mother, fucking senseless, when I was in bed and he'd had a drink, which was most nights. I didn't meet my stepfather until I was 19. And by then I'd already passed out of basic training and I was a man. But I learned more from him in the first 6 to 9, 12 months of him being in my life than I did with my biological father being in the house but not present for the full 9 years before he left us. And so I'm just wondering, for men who are from sort of my background, who maybe don't have a clue what it means to step up and to be a father, what sort of advice would you have?
Well, the only thing is you have, like, this is the answer. There's no other answer than this, is that you have to have men in your life to teach you that. You know, one thing I often hear from people is they'll mock what we're doing here. And they'll say, oh, you know, a real man doesn't need to learn this stuff. What are you talking about? Of course, a real man, whatever you think that to be, of course, a real man needs to learn how to be a man. Like, it isn't just inherent within us.
There's that quote, isn't there? It's if boys don't learn, men won't know.
Yeah, by Douglas Wilson, one of my favorite quotes. You know, we're lazy, we're immediate gratification, we'll beg, we'll steal, we'll borrow, we'll do whatever we can to achieve the results without the effort. Like, we're kind of sacks of shit in a lot of ways, just by default, you know? Yeah. And if you want to learn how to be a man, then you need to learn it from someone who is that.
Yeah.
It's like saying, it's like, it would be like mocking a professional athlete. Let's take, you know, one of the greatest athletes of all time, Tom Brady, like objectively one of the greatest athletes of all time, and saying, what a poser. He had to learn from coaches and teammates how to be good at his profession. Like, nobody would ever say that.
Yeah.
You know, take a great performer, a pianist, for example. Nobody would ever mock somebody who can compose and play beautiful music and say, I can't believe he had to learn how to do that. He wasn't just born with that. What an idiot.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to masculinity and manliness, all of a sudden it's like, you don't know how to change the oil in your car? What a moron.
Yeah.
Like, the guy never learned how to do it. Nobody was ever around to teach him.
Yeah.
Like, we can't fault a kid for not having a man in his life to teach him how to do something. Yeah. So I think before we get to your question, we need to differentiate between a couple of different terms here. Okay. There's masculinity and there's manliness. And some might say I'm just debating semantics, maybe, but I think there's a point to be taken here. Masculinity is, if you want to look it up in Webster's dictionary, it's probably something like this: a set of characteristics or traits that we collectively as a society would associate with men. That's probably something what Webster's might say.
Yep.
That's amoral. So let's take violence. It's proven that men have a higher propensity for violence. Agreed or disagreed?
Yep, 100%.
100%. So is violence immoral? No, it's amoral. Because I just gave you a scenario where violence is immoral, and I gave you another scenario, part of the same scenario, where violence is moral.
Yeah.
So violence is amoral. Aggression is amoral. Dominance, competitiveness, stoicism, discipline, amoral. It's like saying that gun over there that I have on my dresser is evil. The gun's not evil. It's a hunk of metal and plastic that's fashioned in a certain way to perform a function.
Mm-hmm.
If I use it to break into somebody's house and threaten or kill so I can have what's theirs, I would say that's an inappropriate use of the tool. But it's not the tool, it's me who was wielding the tool that made it bad.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, somebody breaks into my house and I shoot them in the face and I protect my property or my family, I just use that for a moral cause, which is to protect me and mine.
Mm-hmm.
So masculinity is amoral. So some people say masculinity is amazing, and other people say masculinity is toxic. It's neither. It just is. We have a higher propensity for violence because of the biological makeup of men. Now, you have to juxtapose that with manliness. Manliness is the application of masculine virtues for the benefit of others and ourselves. That's it. So if I take violence and I use it to protect somebody, or I take my physicality to be able to rescue people in Maui, then I'm using masculinity as a force for good, which means that I'm manly. We would all say that's a manly man. He's man, like that's manliness. And that's the distinction here.
And I guess that's the difference between you, and again, I think you have paraphrased, is it Jack Donovan? And
yeah, he's a friend of mine.
In Sovereignty. And you mentioned that, again, I think it was in this chapter on strength, there's a difference between being a good man and being, sorry, was it? There's a difference between being a good man and being good at being a man. And I think that is basically what you just said there.
It's referenced, Jack Donovan references it. David Gilmour in his book, Manhood in the Making, references it. There is a distinction between being a good man and being good at being a man. So a good man, if you're being good, you're nice, you're kind, you're polite, you're a decent person. These things that we would generally attribute to being nice, a civil individual. But if you're being good at being a man, it's the act of being a man. It's putting those virtues into practice for the betterment of yourself and other people that you care about, or of complete strangers. You know, if I saw a woman or a man getting mugged on the street, I would hope that I would step in for a complete stranger to be able to rescue and save that person who's in need in the moment. Like, it has nothing to do necessarily with the people I love. It's just doing the right thing. We all know what that is.
Yeah.
I can't remember what your original question was. We got on so many different tangents there, and we had a split in technology. So what was your original question? You remember?
I think I may have written it down. No, but I think you did answer it. That sounds like you've answered it.
Yeah. I hope I did. If not, we'll have to do like round 2 at some point.
Oh, I'd look forward to that, definitely. Who has been your personal favorite guest? Now, how many podcasts have you done, not including like your Friday Field Notes and Ask Me Anything?
Yeah, just interviews. I think I'm close to 500 interviews at this point.
So this might be a bit of an open-ended question, but who has been your favorite guest so far?
Gosh, people ask me that, and I never have a prepared answer for that. One person I really liked having on was John Eldredge, the author of Wild at Heart, because that book radically transformed my life personally.
Was that the guy, the quote in Wild at Heart is something like, every man needs a woman to save, a battle to fight. I'm paraphrasing, I'm butchering it completely, but
here it is. It's deep in his heart. Every man longs for a battle to fight, a beauty to rescue, and an adventure to live.
Yeah, 100%. That is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's John Eldredge. That was really good. I mean, I've had awesome guys. George Foreman was a lot of fun. Matthew McConaughey, Terry Crews.
Matthew McConaughey was
Tim
one that
Tebow.
I was like, wow, did not expect him to be on the Order Man podcast, but yeah, that was awesome.
Well, I remember seeing his book, Green Lights, I think it was in the airport. And I was like, oh God, this guy, like, that's a ridiculous, like, so dumb. And then I had a bunch of people like, no, it's really good. It's really good. It's really good. It's really good. I'm like, all right, well, let me have a listen. I'm like, damn, that's really good. It was really good. And I had an opportunity in the time to be able to reach out to him and his team while he was coming out with that book. And him and I had a really good conversation. And I really enjoyed Terry Crews. And then a lot of guys that, you may not know, guys like Jason Wilson, who's running a boys home, not a boys home, excuse me, a boys karate men's program to teach these boys the principles of life through karate. His name's Jason Wilson. Um, Gosh, we've had so many incredible people on, and I try to learn from everybody. That's my goal. Is like,
Mm.
what can I learn from you that will help me in my own life? And I think that's why we've had so much success, because I'm on the path like you are. I'm on the path like the guys who are listening. I'm not. I might be further ahead in some aspects, and I might be further behind in some aspects. So I'm not putting myself out ahead of anybody. I'm like, hey, look, like here's a resource. We got to use this, guys.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what he knows. I want to know, and hopefully you can learn something from him too.
I really like the and what we're talking about, maybe 2 weeks ago now, I got done reading his book, You're Worth It. So Kyle Carpenter,
Yep. Yep.
absolutely phenomenal book and a great episode as well. And if I had the opportunity to interview him, I would jump on that like a tramp on chips.
Like a
The
what? Let me hear that term. Like a what?
Like a tramp on chips,
A tramp on chips. All right.
chips that you would
Interesting. I
get in a
never heard.
chip shop, not Lay's chips.
Okay. Like, okay. What's a chip shop? What do you mean by that?
You didn't go to a chip shop when you're in Scotland. You don't know what you're missing. I mean, your
No,
arteries
I
will
need to.
clog. But so a chip shop it sells fish and chips. So it will
Oh,
sell
got it. Okay.
battered fish and chips,
Okay.
or like big chunky fries. It
Okay.
will
Got it.
sell black pudding, pizzas. It's terribly bad for your arteries, but it is like a staple in
It's
Scotland,
delicious.
to the point where I think about 15, 20 years ago, somebody brought in deep frying a Mars bar. Like it wasn't bad enough that it was deep fried. It was like
That sounds delicious.
um
It's like I did have what is it? Haggis. I did have is it
haggis.
haggis? Yeah, I did
Yeah.
have haggis, which actually
Haggis is
wasn't bad. I was
phenomenal.
like, I don't know about this, but it tastes like a meatball. The texture
Mm.
was different a little bit, but it tastes like a meatball to me.
You need to come over to Scotland for a Burns night. Burns night have obviously the poet Robert Burns,
Yeah.
and eats. I think it's the 20. I want to say the 26th of January every year is Burns night, but it is a full evening. So they bring the haggis out on some special like carry board, and there's poems and there's dancing and all the rest of it, and it's phenomenal. It's a very
That's awesome.
traditional type of event. I've not been to one in years, actually. They used to have it within the sergeant's mess, through some of the commando units, but I never got to go to one. But yeah, it's a phenomenal thing to go to.
I'll have to check it out at some point if I can.
Yeah.
I don't know. I got distracted again. What was the question? Tramp on chips. I can't. So I remembered.
It's akin to Fat Kid on Cake.
Got it.
Um,
That's the more Americanized version.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, we answered it. Who your favorite guest was? You couldn't pick one. There's too many.
Yeah, no,
And
but to your point about Kyle, so Kyle actually came out to my place in Maine, and we were able to break bread together and sit down together and have a conversation. And for him to see him interact with my kids, like, man, I'm so fortunate with all this kind of stuff that I get to do, and I'm just really grateful.
he seems, and I think that's the reason why I love the book so much, is because it's written in such a humble perspective. Like, he literally threw himself on a grenade to save his battle buddy, his Oppo. And
Yeah,
yet he's so humble about the fact. Now, granted, for those of you who haven't read it, Kyle can't remember anything about this whatsoever, can he? He has to recount, he has to rely on eyewitness testimonies to be able to know what happened to him. But still, the guy is awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he's just like, oh yeah, it is what it is. I mean, I think I
mm-hmm.
read in his book that he's, other than the day he was presented it by President Obama, he's only worn it 3 times since then, and it
Mm.
sits in a little case in his cupboard or something like that. And he's just, he seems like such a humble guy. You could just go and have a
Oh, he
beer with
is.
him and chill out, or go and watch the game or whatnot. And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, when he was at our place, he was more like a big brother to my kids. He's a kind of a tease. He'd tease them and play with them, and like he
Yeah,
was. It wasn't like this Medal of Honor recipient who's this country's hero. He just he's like just an incredible human being. So yeah, I'm glad you said him because man, Kyle's great.
yeah, awesome. A couple of quotes that have really touched me from Sovereignty, and I just wanted to tell you them. So the first one was, you can bury your head in the sand and pretend that you're at the mercy of your environment, your associations, and your upbringing, or you can make a conscious choice to do more and to be more. And then I think further down the page, I took it from that. Accepting responsibility and ownership of any given situation means accepting all of it, not just the victories. And when I read that, I was like, do you know what? So obviously, I think when I first read that, I was a corporal. So in the traditional sense, I was in charge of 7 other guys. In reality sense, you're probably looking, depending on who was in the troop at the time, it could be upwards of 30. But that to me there was like, do you know what? Yeah, if the guys fuck up, I don't turn around and go, yeah, sorry, Sergeant, it was actually his fault. It's my team, so I have to turn around and go, yeah, I fucked up. And that sort of followed on to when I read Extreme Ownership by Jocko, and that was almost a game changer as well. An absolutely phenomenal book. But I just wanted to share both those quotes. I mean, there's so much in those books, but those two specifically spoke to me on another level that helped me level up as a Marine. So yeah, thank you for them.
Well, and by the way, like just accepting responsibility doesn't mean you get to or even have to absolve people of their shortcomings.
Mm.
So for example, if I'm working with you and you're on my team and we mess up as a team, that's on me as the leader of that team. But if it's something specific to what you did or didn't do, then you bet your ass I'm going to come to you and say, hey, man, like you let us down.
Yeah.
You didn't do X, Y, and Z. Help me understand why that was. Maybe that was a failure on my part. Maybe I wasn't clear in the way that I needed to be clear with you. Maybe I didn't provide the resources I needed to provide to you, but you failed in that you didn't inform me what was going on and you did a job subpart of what I know you're capable of doing.
Yeah.
So just because we're taking responsibility doesn't mean that we need to like forgive and forget or overlook what our people are doing. It's our responsibility to ensure they have the training, they have the information, and they have the tools to succeed, and that they're the right people. If I do give you the tools, the training, and the right information, and you fail, I'm going to try to do what I can do. But if you habitually fail, then it's on me to let you go.
Do you know, it's funny you mentioned that because in the UK, the army had a series of adverts, and I'll link a couple of them to you. And I can't remember exactly, but basically they asked for snowflakes in this advert. I mean, like full blown, we want snowflakes. I think
the US is doing that too, by the way.
Yeah, I've seen the one with 2 mothers and the cartoons and all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, there was another one, and I'm pretty sure that it was a guy sat there playing his Xbox or his PlayStation or something like that, and the army wants you. The thing is, it worked. There was a massive increase in those that were joining the army. However, and I found this out almost through a backdoor sort of source, what also happened is, say there was 10,000 extra recruits had made it into training. There's also 10,000 extra recruits were deemed what's the correct term? Basically too shit to serve in the army.
Yeah, not fit or not worthy, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, in the olden days, so when I joined in 2005, and prior to that, the advert for Royal Marines Commandos was 99.9% need not apply. And it was phenomenal. And 99.9% didn't apply. It was that 0.1% or that 0.1% that did apply.
Like that.
And the standard has never changed.
The U.S.
Yeah.
Marine Corps, I mean, think about what I don't know if you know what the U.S. Marine Corps slogan, we all know, the
The
few,
few, the
the
proud.
proud.
Yeah.
Same concept. The few. This is not for everybody. This is for the few, the proud, those who can actually do it, those who want to serve their country, those who believe in American values. And it sounds like you guys have something similar going on with this infusion of woke nonsense and ideology, which says that you can be anybody, that you can come here to find yourself, that you can. It's like, no, we don't want you to find yourself here. We don't want you to express yourself as an individual. That's the exact opposite of what the military is trying to do. Why do you think they shave our heads and put us all in the same uniform?
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to have a collective set of ideals, not individualism.
Yeah. I don't know where the military is going at the minute. Come November, I've got 4 years left till I retire, unless they keep me on, which would be good. I'd like to stay in. There's not really too much of that wokeism in our core, which I'm glad to say.
Not yet.
Not yet, no. But certainly within certain regiments in the army, the RAF is quite pink and fluffy when it comes to certain things. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of hardworking men and women in there, but a lot of this shit you see on TikTok and other social media, it's just absolutely horrendous. I think Russia and China are probably sitting there pissing their pants, not really worrying too much that if it comes to a full-blown war, they'll be like, oh, it's all right, we'll just take their Xboxes and glow sticks away and, you know. But anyway, conscious that time is pressing on, Ryan, I have one more question for you. And as we spoke before I hit record, sort of my podcast tries to emulate the way that you do yours in terms of not having too many scripted questions, trying to get the conversation just to flow naturally and all the rest of it. And I've probably listened to close to 150, maybe 200 episodes of Order of Man. And what's the last question that you ask every guest on your main podcast?
I don't do it anymore because I've changed that, but I think what you're talking about is, what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah, 100%. So what I've done is I've taken that. And so my last question to you is, what did it mean to serve in your armed forces?
It's a good question. I'm really proud of my service. You know, I joined when I was 17, and then once I graduated high school, I was able to go to basic training. And I do believe in these concepts and ideals of freedom and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and to be able to serve that way and to be able to wear the uniform has been a really honorable part of my life. You know, there's a lot of frustrations with, like we were talking about earlier, where the military is going now. It wasn't like that when I was in the military. And so it's unfortunate to see, but I still think there's a lot of great men and women who are fighting a righteous battle. And it is a righteous battle. It's a righteous battle for freedom and liberty, not just in our own countries, but across the whole planet. So to be able to be part of that and band with people who believe in that, and to be able to sacrifice and even be brotherhood with people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, what an honor. You know, what a privilege to be able to stand with those, like we said earlier, those few who have made that sacrifice for our way of life.
Wow. Yeah. Well, like you say, you always get from each guest they ask that question to, you get a unique answer. And certainly that was unique. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Like I said,
brother. Thanks for the invite.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And I've been trying not to act like a total fanboy. But considering how long I've been following you, it's a dream come true. So thank you for coming on, man.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm really glad to do this, and I'm glad to see you take the initiative to do it, because so many people want to start things and launch things and have ideas and dreams, and so few of them do. So kudos to you for doing it.
Nice one. Thanks again, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Stand Easy podcast with your host, Crash Stevenson. Join in the discussion over on the Facebook page at fb.me/Stand Easy Podcast.